Welcome to an hour of worship with Bethel Baptist Church. We thank you for being a part of this ministry. We believe that God has given us this television ministry to be a blessing to our community and for the preaching of His Word.
Let me tell you about a dead man. His rebel heart did him in. Let me tell you about a moment that he began to breathe again. Well, that was me, buried deep underneath my shame. But Jesus spoke life in me. I ain't never been the same. I've been loved by the cross, saved by grace. Freedom came calling me out of that grave. I ain't nothing now like who I was. Been washed by the water and covered by the blood. Washed by the water and covered by the blood. It's a hallelujah new day. I'm alive and well to tell about His every morning mercy and a love that never fails. Now this hope that I know has got a hold on me. I'm singing everywhere I go the song of the redeemed. I've been loved by the cross, saved by grace. Come on calling me out of my grave. I ain't nothing now like who I was. Been washed by the water and covered by the blood. Washed by the water and covered by the blood. Oh yeah. Oh, what a difference He made. Thank you, Jesus, for the change in me. Oh, I'll never be the same. Oh, the blood of Jesus. I'm singing, oh, the blood of Jesus. Singing, oh, the blood of Jesus. Washing white as snow. I've been loved with the cross, saved by grace. Freedom came calling me out of my grave. I ain't nothing now like who I was. I've been born again, bought with a price, brought from the darkness into marvelous light. I ain't nothing now like who I was. Been washed by the water and covered by the blood. Washed by the water and covered by the blood. Washed by the water and covered by the blood.
Oh, I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whispers of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, and here we go. Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers, far and wide, but I've known that we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. perfect in all of your ways to us. Sing it to the Father. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Oh, this love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, you're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. Our God, He's such a good, good Father. This morning, I hope that you can say that He's the King of Kings in your life. Let's just worship Him this morning in spirit and in truth. Let's sing together. In the darkness we were waiting, without hope and without light. Till from heaven you came running, there was mercy in your eyes. To fulfill the law and promise, to a virgin came the word. From a throne of endless glory, to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost. You redeemed the whole creation. You did not despise the cross. For even in your suffering, you saw to the other side. Knowing this was our salvation, Jesus for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. The morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb that conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, in the Spirit did the flame. Now the gospel truth of all
Psalm 78. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to be politically correct today or not, Brother Paul. Yeah. So I could title this, and I have titled it, A Perpetual Faith. A Perpetual Faith. Because Psalm 78, that's exactly what it's about. It's about fathers passing down their faith to their children. And that's the seriousness of this passage. Or I could title it The Emasculated Faith. And that's because that's what will happen. The word means to be a shadow of what was. It means to be made weaker or less effective. It means deprived of his male role or identity. That's what emasculation means. And I believe that if we don't adhere to God's word, that's what will happen to the church. That's what will happen to God's people. Now you say, Pastor, why such a harsh word? Because when you look at this passage, in verse 9 of Psalm 78, it says, the children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. The men didn't know how to fight. Now I want to make this spiritual application because I'm going to make this. So in the Old Testament, we're concerned about a political people, a specific people politically and nationally. But the New Testament is concerned about a children of God spiritually, a spiritual nation, not so much a physical nation, a spiritual nation. And some of the warfare that we talk about in the Old Testament is equivalent to the spiritual warfare that we talk about in the New Testament. So I want to make that application for you. I've made this application with going in to possess the promised land. They had enemies to fight. They had enemies that kept them from experiencing all of the promised land that God had for them. Spiritually, we may possess salvation and we may be in the promised land with respect to the salvation of God. But you and I, if we're not careful, if we don't defeat the enemies of our faith, the enemies that come against us in our spiritual journey, if we don't defeat them, you and I will live defeated lives, even in the promised land. Do you make that step with me from the Old Testament to the New Testament? Do you make that step with me? God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. But they didn't possess all that land. In fact, they're still having trouble today because they didn't possess all the land like God told them to. Obedience. And you and I, the Bible says He's blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. In fact, He has told us that we are more than conquerors in Christ Jesus. I heard somebody this week, or I was reading something, that said, well, we won't get victory over this until we die. Now, I want you to think about that statement. That tells us that death is the victor and not Christ. Are you with me? Well, we're not going to get victory over this sin or that sin until we die. Well, that says that death is the final authority in that. But God's Word says that its victory's in Christ Jesus. It's in His truth. It'll set you free, and the Son will set you free indeed. We're more than conquerors in Christ, not in death. Now, we're conquerors in death as well. Why? Because nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing can separate us from Christ Jesus. if we're not obedient to pass on a perpetual faith to our children, and I'm preaching this on Father's Day because it is the father's role. That is God's Word. Deuteronomy chapter 6, Psalms chapter 78, it's God's Word that says it's the father's role to be the spiritual leaders of the home. I don't care if you agree or disagree with that. It don't matter to me. I'm telling you what God's Word says. God's Word says in Corinthians that He sanctifies the home by the believing husband. Now His grace will do it through the wife if the husband is not. He's made if you will, a provision to sanctify the home through the believing wife when the husband is not. But that's not God's intention. That was not His intentions. He intended for the man to be the leader in the home and for the man to be the leaders in the community. That's what He intended. And that's not to make less of the woman. In fact, that's to raise her on a pedestal. That's to put her on the pedestal that she deserves. Let me give you some background of this psalm. I'm going to use this outline. I'm going to support it with a lot of things. I'm going to look at the background. I'm going to look at the explanation. And I'm going to look at the application. Some takeaways, if you will. Background. Explanation of Psalm 78. And some takeaways. I'm not here to pick on fathers, and I'm not just doing it on Father's Day. You know where I stand on fathers being the lead in the home. Since 1963, fatherless children, fatherless homes has increased by 300%. That's why we're dealing with the culture we're dealing with today. Because dads are not in the homes. That's why we're dealing with that. Dealing with what we're dealing with. Let me look at the background of Psalm 78. I'm going to give you several things, several truths about the background. This psalm is accredited to Asaph. That's who it says was the author of this psalm. Asaph was a Levite singer and worship leader. He was a prophet in the courts of David. But the Bible also seems to indicate to us that he was a godly father. You say, Pastor, how do you know? Because the Bible says that David and his captains, they chose Asaph and his sons to lead worship. They were at least following in the footsteps of their daddy's faith. Now you say, Pastor, you're reading too much into that. And I may be. I'm just telling you what God's Word says. That they were the first ones chosen. Asaph and his 4 sons were the first one chose to lead worship in the courts of King David. That's in 1 Chronicles 25, verses 1 and 2, if you want to look there later. But for time's sake, I'm not going to go there. 1 Chronicles 25, verses 1 and 2. Psalm 78. Again, it's accredited to Asaph. Psalm 78 is most likely written, this background is important, it's most likely written after King David. We know that from verse 72. That's in verse 72, the history that is recorded here stops with King David's reign. So most likely this psalm was recorded for us between David's reign and Solomon's reign. But some believe, this is important, listen to me. The nation of Israel got divided into 2, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and that happened under Solomon's reign. And you know why it happened under Solomon's reign? Because he was not the man that his father was. He had all the wisdom of God, but yet he didn't lead like his father. He had 700 plus concubines and wives. Y'all can figure that out later. But he began to chase after the gods of this world. And because of that, God divided the kingdom. This might have been the time frame because he begins to talk about Ephraim, which is also Judah. And so this could have been after Solomon, after he had rebelled against the Lord and the Lord had divided the kingdom into two parts. It could have been during that time frame that this psalm was recorded for us. Psalm 78 is a parable of sort. It's a parable. Not like a parable of the New Testament, but let me show you. It's a prophecy of a parable. Stay with me on this because this is important to us. This is a point I want to make, it being a parable. So look with me in verse 1 and 2. He says here, it says, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable." So Psalm 78 is a parable, but this is a prophecy that will not be fulfilled until Jesus begins to teach parables. If you'll look in, for time's sake, I'm not going to go there, but if you'll look in Matthew 13, verses 34 and 35, it tells us that Jesus began to teach in parables so that the prophecy or that the prophet would be fulfilled. Well, this is what he's talking about right here. He's talking about Psalm 78, verses 1 and 2. And so we need to understand that this is a parable. It's a parable. Again, it would be fulfilled in Jesus' preaching ministry, his teaching ministry in Matthew 13, 34 through 35. Now, let me make this point with you. I pray you're still with me. Dads, hang with me. We even gave you a cookie to eat to keep your attention on me this morning. Yeah. Well, it really was to keep you awake. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding, dads. Listen to me. A parable is meant for two things. It's meant to conceal truth. Now you better listen up to me now. A parable, Jesus tells us this. It's meant to hide truth. Why in the world? I've always wondered that. But it's also meant to reveal truth. It can do two things. It can conceal truth or it can reveal truth. A parable can conceal truth, it can hide truth, or it can reveal truth. You say, "Pastor, why? Why?" Well, I believe this to be at least one of the reasons. I don't think that it was meant for an evil intent. I think it was meant for a good intent. You say, "Pastor, what do you mean?" So let's think about this. I believe that parables are taught so that we will be forced to kind of lean in on it. You say, "What do you mean by that, Pastor?" I believe parables are taught so that it would require a little bit of effort out of us to understand it. I believe parables are taught so that we don't just run through them, "Yeah, we got that, and move on. I believe parables are taught to force us to meditate so that we could gain the understanding of God's Word. It is concealed. Let me read what I wrote here. It is concealed because it requires effort and application before its meaning bears any significance on its hearers. It is concealed because some will not put forth the effort to understand its truth. And they will not apply its truths because it will require too much effort for application. Now I'm just telling you where we're at. I'm not meaning to be ugly. I know some people think that that's what I'd wake up in the morning thinking how I can wake up and be ugly. I'm not. I'm just telling you. I'm just being realistic. Some will not look back at Psalm 78, even though it has the truths of Psalm 78 can influence 5 generations of our children. The promise of Psalm 78 is God's influence on 5 generations of our children. Whatever a generation is, I've saw different figures. It can be as 40 years to 70 years or 80 years. So God's Word promises, if we're obedient, God's Word promises that my actions can influence 200 years of my children's lives. That's how significant this passage is. But some won't give it another time or day. I'm just telling you, that's reality. That's not my opinion, that's just the way it is. A parable is revealed to those who will listen, hear it, seek to understand it, apply it. That's who a parable is revealed to. Now, where do I see that? Well, the teaching of the New Testament tells us why Jesus taught in parables. But also listen to the preacher here, the prophet here, who's trying to gain the attention of the audience. When he says, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable." In other words, you're going to have to put forth some effort to understand the teaching of this passage. You're going to have to lean in a little bit. Do you get what I mean when I say you got to lean in a little bit? Not physically, but spiritually. You got to lean in a little to say, man, I want to get this. I want to get this. Hey, what we're talking about here really is changing the course of a nation. Or changing at least the course of your family. That's what we're talking about here. I believe, you've heard the old saying, so goes the home, so goes the church, so goes the community. I believe it goes back to this, so goes the father. Man, that's where the hiccup is. It's the fathers in the home. The truths and understanding of parables, listen, the truth that I'm preaching and the word I'm preaching, it can be snatched away. It can be snatched away by the enemy. You remember the parable of the sower and the seeds? It can be snatched away. You can hear this word and you can say, man, he's right on. He's right on. Then you're going to walk out of here and I'm telling you the enemy's going to snatch it away from you. Or the distraction of this world is going to snatch it away from you. You say, Pastor, you're so opinionated. No, I just shared with you the interpretation of the sower and the seeds. That's all I just shared with you. I just shared with you the reality of God's word preached and the enemy snatches it away, or either the cares of this world snatches it away or the distractions of this world snatches it away. That's part of the background of this psalm. Psalm 78 and its significance can easily be missed unless you approach it with spiritual eyes and a heart which is ready to understand and obey it. Let me read that again. Psalm 78 and its significance, its influence in your life can be easily missed unless we approach it with spiritual eyes and with a heart that's ready to obey it. A heart that's ready to understand it, eyes that are willing to see it. That's why Jesus said, as he's talking in Mark, when he said, hey, I'm speaking in parables so that those who have eyes can see and those who have ears can hear. That's why he taught in parables. He wanted you to understand it, but you were going to have to put forth some effort. Hey, this psalm has at least 3 purposes. Here, still under the background, okay? Let me give you those purposes. This psalm is written to inform its readers of God's redemptive work. This is just the background now, the intro, if you will. He wrote this psalm so that we would have a history of His redemptive work. And that's what the psalm is all about. I'm not going to read the whole psalm. But what you're going to do, you're going to see section after section. You're going to see where He led the children of God out of Egypt. You're going to see when He parted the Red Sea. You're going to read how He gave manna from heaven, how He caused the quail to come through. You're going to hear about the mighty works of God and His miracles in Psalm 78. You're going to see all those things. You're going to see, you're just going to have the history of how God dealt with mankind and His redemptive work among men. Second purpose, it's meant to serve as instruction in our faith. Instruction in faith, in our faith. Let me say a couple of things about this. Instructions concerning faith in God, instructions concerning our heritage of faith. You know, I know I'm speaking to dads, but moms and dads, Christians, your children will not know, your friends, your co-workers, your family, they will not know your faith unless you share it with them. That's why He says, I've established a testimony in Jacob. Don't you know at some point Jacob pulled his sons aside and they knew the history of their father's faith? Well, that's the only way it'll be carried down. In fact, there's a passage in Judges that says when Joshua died, there arose a generation who did not know the Lord. You know how that happened? Dad didn't tell his son about the Lord. Dad didn't tell his children about his testimony, how he come to know Jesus as Lord. That's how that happens. That's how that happens. Hey, that's what this passage is all about. We have instructions about how to pass on our faith. The third purpose, so it's meant to inform readers of God's redemptive work. It's meant to serve as an instruction in our faith. And it's meant to serve as a warning from sin. This psalm is meant to serve as a warning from sin. Let me give you one verse. Turn with me real quick to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. And so the reason why I can apply this psalm so passionately is because I've made that step from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And the Apostle Paul makes this step when he teaches the Corinth church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it's about our faith. It's about examples of our faith. That's what Hebrews 11 is about. But specifically here, the Apostle Paul tells the Corinth church in 1 Corinthians 10:11, now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, for our teaching, for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. I mean, he wrote this to the Corinth church, and he's saying, we have what's written in the Old Testament for our instruction. For our instruction. Here's the explanation. Let me give you some explanation. I give you some background, maybe too much background. Again, I don't know if you take anything away from the background. Just know that God's addressing the disobedience of His children, Israel. He's addressing a church. He's addressing a people who were not as they should be. They were not living as they were expected to live. They were not living as they were commanded to live. And in that, well, let's just leave it there. They were disobedient. Let's just leave it there. They were disobedient. It's a parable. It's a parable. Here's the explanation. Look with me, if you will. Verses 1 through 8. Really, 1 through 8 is it's the introduction, if you will. We know an introduction covers the whole matter, right? It introduces what it's going to teach us. And I'm going to read this to us. I'm going to read this introduction to us. It says, "Give ear, O my people, to my law, and incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done. For He established a testimony in Jacob, and He appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children." What did He command? What did He command the fathers of Israel to make known to their children? What did He command? The law. His Word. His Word. It's Deuteronomy chapter 6 as well. We'll end there. But it says, Fathers, teach your children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they might arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God. Now, guys, in this introduction, the writer says you're going to have to lean in a little. You're going to have to pay close attention. You're going to have to meditate on this scripture a little bit. We're talking about 5 generations of history here. We're talking about you blessing 5 generations. You blessing your child, your grandchild, your great-grandchild, and even your great-great-grandchild. Anybody got any great-great-grandchildren in here? I know age. Great-great-grandchildren? Great-great. Blessing 5 generations. Your faith can influence 5 generations. And you got to give a little thought to this. You got to give a little intention to it. If you're going to get it, if not, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It'll all work out in the end. It will work out in the end. Maybe not how you expect it, but it will work out. The scripture says we'll be resurrected to life, or you'll be resurrected to death, eternal death. Now that's what God's Word says. That's not me. But not only that, this verse says that. The whole reason that you and I are to be intentionally passing down our faith is so that our children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren might be saved. What you and I do today influences 5 generations for the sole purpose of salvation. Look, that's what it says in verse 7 now, if I'm interpreting this correct, that they may set their hope in God. That they may set their hope in God. That they may set their hope in God. And if they don't set their hope in God, they may be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. Now, let me give you what's at stake in the explanation of this parable. Here's what's at stake. The salvation of our children and our grandchildren up to 5 generations is at stake here. If we interpret this passage correctly. The life that you and I live today as Christians, or don't live, will influence 5 generations. That's what God's Word says. Then I said, here's what's at stake as well. An emasculated children. You say, what do you mean by that, Pastor? Well, I don't mean it in the non-politically correct fashion. But here's what I mean. When I read this Psalm 78, and I've studied this passage for about 10 years now. That's how important Psalm 78 has been to me. Maybe 7 years. This is the definition. Well, here, it's the children of God who do not live up to their role and or their identity. Now, guys, I think that's where the church is today. Now, you may say, no, I don't know about that, Pastor. I just believe we live in a church today that's not living up to its role and to its identity. Yeah. Spiritually emasculated. It means to be deprived of his male role or identity. Of an organization, it means to be made weaker or less effective. They were armed with bows. They were armed with all the spiritual resources they needed. Yet they turned and run in the day of battle. If I said to the church today, church, we're about to go stand against this particular sin. If I said that to an association, this is what I'd get. Well, Pastor, we'd just rather love like Jesus. I heard that in the gambling. Well, preacher, you're just a little hard. You're just a little traditional. No, I'm not. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to gamble. I'm trying to do it for our generations to come because it's not good. Now you say, Pastor, why are you on it? I don't know why I'm on it. It's free. I didn't have it in my notes. I just added it. It's one of them ad-lib, one of them rabbit chasing deals. I'm just telling you, we as a church, we don't live like we're intended to live today. We don't live according to God's Word. Now we live in the world and of the world. That's how we live today. We don't live set apart. We don't live set apart. Third, here's what's at stake. The judgment and the wrath of God is at stake. In verses 12 through 72, we look at the judgment of God. Here's what's at stake, though. I noticed something. Look with me in verse 41. It says, yes, again and again they tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. Is there anything God cannot do? How would we answer that question? Is there anything God cannot do? I would say, well, absolutely not. There's nothing God cannot do. I'll tell you something God will not do. He will not bless us in the midst of our disobedience. He will not bless your life in the midst of disobedience. He will not walk with you in your sin. That's what God's Word says. You say you have fellowship with God, but yet you walk in sin. You're a liar and the truth is not in you. God will not walk with you in your sin. Now you may receive the rain of blessings like everybody else receives the rain. It says it rains on the just and the unjust. You may be under the umbrella of somebody else's blessings. But I tell you, when it comes to you influencing 5 generations beyond you, it won't happen. Listen, here's the explanation of these verses, verses 12 through 72. Stay with me. We're almost through. What we see in these verses, we see His redemption. We see His miracles. We see His works, His provisions, His faithfulness. You know, as I studied this passage, I asked myself, have I taught my children, have I taught my boys about God's redemption when God redeemed me? I believe I've told them my salvation story. I've not told them all of my salvation story. I ain't told anybody all of my salvation story. Don't want people to know what He saved me from. His miracles. Have I spoke to my children about the miracles of God? Have I spoke to my children about the works of God in my life and in my family's life? I believe I have. as I speak about seminary and I speak about surrender and I speak about those, I believe I have. Have I told my children about the provisions of God? I believe I have. I've told them and taught them there's nothing that we have ever needed that God has not supplied. Hey, will you testify to that? Two of you. Thank you, Miss Hope, for agreeing with me. Have you told your children, though, about the provisions of God? Because that's what this psalm is about. It says, listen, tell your children about God's marvelous works in your life. Tell them the history of Him parting the Red Sea. Tell them the history of the 10 plagues it mentions. Tell them how your people were redeemed out of Israel. Tell them how your family, how you might be changing the history of your family and the testimony of your family. Have you shared that? That's what it's telling us here. Here it also, these verses recount God's marvelous works, but about God's children's sinfulness. It talks about the children of Israel, their rebellion against God. Let me say this. Your children don't need to know about these things. Your children need to know about God's miraculous works in your life. Why? Because by nature, this is their DNA. They got this from me. Your children got this from you. Rebellious spirit. That's a fallen nature, right? They got a lack of trust and faith. They got that. Hey, I can do this on my own. I don't need anybody to help me with this. That's in their DNA. They got that from you. But these other things are about teaching what God's DNA looks like in your life. Faith and trust, where provisions come from. When we read this account in Psalm 78, we see the ungratefulness of man. I believe today as a church and as a people that we live enjoying the blessings of God. If you go, is it Hagar, where it says, is it Hagar where it says they spent time building their own houses and God said it's time to quit building your houses and build my house, my kingdom? Is it Hagar? Hagar. Thank you. I knew it was a hey something. Hagar. You're exactly right. I've preached on that and I think that's where we are today. Here is the ungratefulness. Look with me. Here is how the people of God can be ungrateful. Look with me in verse 30 of Psalm 78, verse 30. We're almost through, I think. No, we're almost through. Stay with me. It says, they were not deprived of their craving. In other words, God let them enjoy everything that they craved. Listen, but while the blessings was still in their mouth, His judgment came against them. In other words, the people of God, man, they were living lives of plushness. Now, this passage is recorded for us. I believe it's in Numbers 13. Let me see if I can tell you right off. I've got it in my notes. Numbers 11:33. It's when He provided meat for them in the wilderness. They had the meat in their mouth. Numbers 11:33 says, while the meat was still between their teeth, they rebelled against God. I mean, the very blessings that God has given us, we use them against God. We use them against God. We use them against God. These verses speak of their failure to live up to their identity. Let me give you some takeaways just quickly. These are things that we can do as fathers, as mothers, according to Psalm 78. I'm going to give you 7 things. I won't comment on them maybe. One, we must be intentional, continual, and steadfast in our faith. Our kids learn from us. I said I wasn't going to comment, was I? A wishy-washy faith doesn't do your children any good. On again, off again, it doesn't do your children a bit of good. I'm not going to say that. God may can use it. Second, we must live out our faith in front of our children. Verse 8 says, and they may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation. A generation that did not set its heart aright and whose spirit was not faithful to God. We must live out our faith in front of our children. Third, we must teach our children God's Word. We must teach our children God's Word. However that looks for you. We got to teach our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. If you're blessed to have great-grandchildren, you got to teach them God's Word. You got to teach them God's Word. And you say, Pastor, I failed. No, as long as you still have breath, you haven't failed. Because there's something called repentance. Repentance is when we confess that we don't add up to where God would have us to be. Repentance is when we fail, when we realize and we repent and we acknowledge that we failed as a believer, as a father. Repentance. I'm telling you, God blesses repentance. That's where He can start working, is that repentance. He can't work until there's repentance. We must teach our children what's important and what's eternal. We must teach our children what's important and what's eternal. And I'm telling you, we teach our children what's important one way or the other. 5, we must teach our children to whom we trust. We must teach our children to whom we trust. Do we trust in chariots and horses and finances? Or do we trust in the Lord? We must teach our children who we trust or in what we trust. We must teach our children where our provisions come from. The Scripture says we've got to praise Him and honor Him with all that we are and all that we have. That was the purpose of this psalm, was to sing praises to the one who provided, for the one who redeemed us, to the one who provided water from the rock and manna from heaven and redemption from Egypt. We were to praise Him. Number 7, we need to teach our children the testimony of our faith. The testimony of our faith. I'm not going to belabor that one. You may not have written it for the pastor, but you ought to write it for your children. You ought to write it for your children. They ought to know your testimony. They ought to know who you put your trust in. I'm going to close with Deuteronomy chapter 6. Here is some good instruction. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Here's a good starting place. Now, I'm not sure the specifics. I can help you with that. We can talk about the specifics, but look at this. This is called the Shema. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates." You can literally do this. Would nothing be wrong with that? But this is figuratively as well. It's saying that, hey, you need to intentionally and continually teach God's Word to your children. You need to model your faith. Love the Lord with all your heart. You need to model your faith. You need to teach them God's Word. Those are starting points. Again, it's a parable. It's a parable. It's a dark saying of old. It has the it has the capabilities of affecting 5 generations of your home. Men, ladies. 5 generations you can affect them for the gospel. I'm going to just tell you, and it ain't to pat me on the back, but I just understand the Scripture. And I'm going to tell you this, when I hold my little grandbabies, if you don't think I don't tell them that God loves them and that God sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross for them, you say, Pastor, they can't even understand that. I don't know if they can. I'd rather tell them little ones than I had some old ones sometimes. They don't talk back. No, when I have them in my hands, it's just me and them. Oh, yeah. I tell them God loves them. I don't want them to. I don't want old dad to pass on from this scene, granddad pass on from this scene without them knowing it, that God loves them. I want to influence them as long as God's given me breath. I want to influence them. Why? So that they may set their hope in Jesus one of these days. So they may set their hope in God. Hey, men, you have a great task. You have a great responsibility. One that you're not equipped for. You're not equipped for. I'm not equipped for it. Only God can equip us for it. And when we align our heart with His, then He can use us. Then He can use us. I'm going to ask you to stand with me, heads bowed, eyes closed. I hope this hour of worship was a blessing to you. This program would not be possible if it were not for the support of some generous sponsors. If you would like to support this ministry as well, please visit our website or contact our church office. May God bless you.